Yo, what's going on, y'all? It's Cone, and we need to have an immediate discussion about the Indiana Pacers, and more specifically, Tyrese Haliburton. Last night, they faced off against the Houston Rockets in a game where they got decimated. They didn't lead for a single moment in the second half, lost by 17, and were down by as much as 24 points, giving up 130 in the process. Now, Houston is very good. I'm overdue to make a video about the Rockets that'll hopefully come within like the next week or so, but Indiana is a team that's trying to get back on track, and I mean, they have a good bit of talent too, even though they're dealing with injuries. And some guys had good games, like Siakam had 21 and 4. TJ McConnell was awesome with 17 points, continuing a pretty good season from him. Quentin Jackson had 24 points. Enrique Freeman had 6, but it was on perfect shooting. A lot of guys contributed. Obviously, it wasn't enough, but the biggest culprit for why they lost this game was Tyrese Haliburton, the guy that's supposed to be their superstar. He finished the night with just 4 points on 1 of 7 shooting to go with 8 dimes and 2 turnovers. And the only guy on the entire roster that he outscored that played in the game was James Johnson. Everybody else was passing him up in the points category. And this is not just an isolated incident. If you've been following the NBA this season and the Pacers specifically, you'll notice that this is a trend, and his play has been easily the biggest reason why the Pacers have been pretty underwhelming so far this season. They're sitting at a record of 6-9, which has them as the 9 seed right now in what is a very weak Eastern Conference to begin the season. They're only 1 game back of the 5 seed, 3 games under 500 for reference. That record would have them tied with the Blazers for 13th in the West, so they're definitely not dead in the water. Like, they still are right there in the playoff mix, but it's not nearly the record or the performance you would expect so far from a team that was in the Eastern Conference Finals and many thought could take a jump this season, has very high level talents, even though some of the supporting pieces are hurt. But none of that matters if Tyrese Haliburton just doesn't know how to play basketball anymore. On the season, he's putting up 15.3 points per game, 3.5 rebounds, and 8.5 assists with 1.3 steals, while shooting a horrific 37.5% from the field and 28.4% from 3. That's the lowest mark of his Pacers tenure in basically every single statistical category outside of steals. Not to mention, easily his worst true shooting percentage of his entire career, and it's the second lowest out of anybody in the entire league, averaging 15 plus points per game, only ahead of Kyle Kuzma, and he's behind guys like Anthony Simons, Jalen Green, Jordan Clarkson, Fred VanVleet, guys that have had a lot of efficiency issues in their careers. And as you widen the scope to 10 plus points per game, he's hardly better in terms of his efficiency than Josh Giddey and Scoot Henderson right now. Some individual bad performances include a game where he had 0 points against the Knicks. He had a game with 6 points on 2 of 11 shooting. He had 9 against Orlando recently on 3 of 14 shooting. He's only scored 20 plus points 3 times on the entire season. He really just looks nothing like himself out there, especially when it comes to his decision making, because last year he was incredibly decisive. It felt like he always made the right play, and now he's just missing reads. He's second guessing himself. There are moments where it looks like Ben Simmons where he doesn't even look to score the basketball, and he kind of gets downhill and then immediately looks for somebody to pass to like it's predetermined rather than reading what the defense is giving him. It just feels like there's no confidence. He's genuinely been a negative player so far this season when you combine that with the fact that he's still not playing really any defense, not that he really has throughout his entire career so far. And this has contributed to them still being a bad defense. Not that anybody was expecting this big jump on that end, or at least I wasn't. However, last season, while they weren't good defensively, they had one of the best offenses of all time, which carried them in a lot of those games. They had a lot of 135 to 130 wins, but now they're just the 16th ranked offense because Tyrese Haliburton, who was the quarterback of that generational offense, can't get anything to go. It's been insane to watch a guy who last year was heralded as one of the next great point guards in the NBA as a rising superstar start the season so terribly. We've seen all-star start years bad before, but this is just a completely different level. He looks lost out there at the moment. I've seen some reports that Haliburton might be dealing with a back injury, which honestly, if that's the case, I completely believe it. It's easier for me to picture that than for me to picture a guy that is so talented just completely forgetting how to play basketball. And if there is a back injury, he just needs to go ahead and sit, because right now it's not doing the Pacers any favors by him trying to play through it and playing poorly. It would be much more effective if he just went ahead and sat, and even if the Pacers lose him for a majority rest of the season, they don't really do anything this year, it's much more important that Haliburton gets healthy than tries to force his way into even like decent play this season, where I don't think anybody thinks they're a real contender anyways. Plus, back injuries are something you absolutely don't want to mess with. I mean, you can take a look at Ben Simmons and the trajectory of his his career where he was looked at as one of the next great NBA players, and now there are people questioning if he's even going to be in the league next season, and if he is he going to get more than like a minimum contract when his Nets one expires this summer? But even outside of the injuries, whether it is the back thing or maybe still a lingering hamstring thing going back to last year when he suffered that, which really derailed the second half of his season, there are overall concerns about his play just in general. He definitely doesn't have the tightest handle in the world. He's not the best at creating space with the wacky jumper. He needs a little bit more than some other guys to get that shot off. He doesn't have the most burst in the world, not the craziest athlete. There are some serious limitations at times with Tyrese Haliburton's offensive game. And so when he has an injury like this or just doesn't look like himself, his level of play can drastically fall off. Now, he's still a good playmaker. He still can read the game well, but he definitely doesn't seem to have the scoring upside that people previously were envisioning, like last year when he was averaging 27 and 12 during the, again, in-season tournament run where he looked completely unstoppable. We saw a little bit of this in the playoffs last year where it felt like defenses knew how to better throw him off his game. And there were also a lot of times where Haliburton looks like he's unsure about whether or not he should attack, whether he should play make. It still feels like that's something he's trying to figure out now that he's got more talent on his team. But just in general, he's got to be better in pretty much every area of the game. Shooting, playmaking, decision-making, defense for sure. It's been probably the worst start I could have imagined to this year for Haliburton, and probably not the Pacers because they could be like the Sixers right now where the Pelicans were just completely decimated at the bottom of their conferences. But it's been extremely underwhelming so far, and their superstar not playing up to superstar standards is exactly why. And this does bring about the question of if Haliburton can be their guy. To win a championship, you need typically a top 5 player or someone around that realm or just an overall stacked squad. And Haliburton's only 24. I'm not giving up on him at all. He's still a very capable all-star, fringe all-NBA level guard when he's at his best. But if he's not the guy, then the question is, who is going to be the guy for them? Because it's not going to be Siakam, especially not at this point in his career. It's not going to be like Mathurin. They don't have anybody on the roster that can take that spot. So do they trade for somebody? Is it through a draft pick somehow? I don't really know what the path is forward for Indiana if Haliburton doesn't continue to rapidly ascend, because to me, that was always the path for them to reach eventual championship contention. It was Haliburton becomes a bona fide superstar, you add some pieces around him, Siakam remains as a really solid secondary piece, and you try to explore contending that way, and maybe eventually you add like a third star or a fourth guy or whatever. They had assets and interesting players to make moves around Tyrese Haliburton, but if he's not going to become that player eventually, then where do you get that guy? And all this is made more concerning by the fact that the Pacers just paid him a ton of money, a bag that was completely deserved for what he did for them last season. You just got to hope that he is able to continuously play up to that contract when he gets healthy, and that we aren't seeing kind of a stagnation from his game. Again, I don't think he just completely forgot how to play basketball. I think he's going to get back to a pretty good level, but the question is, how much higher does he have to go? And as much as I know Pacers fans don't want to hear this, and I don't want to say this, it's starting to feel like this could be a little bit of a 2021 Hawks situation where Trae Young and the Atlanta Hawks made it to the Eastern Conference Finals. They made things interesting before ultimately losing to a much better team. And then, that team and Trae kind of got anointed. They were like next up. Trae was going to break through and be a superstar, and the Hawks were, a little bit maybe lucky in their run. They maybe shouldn't have been to that point, but they had a real opportunity to prove a lot of people wrong the next season and showcase that even if they weren't like championship contenders and the favorites in the East, they could still compete with the best of them. And then they had a really disappointing season. I hope that isn't the direction it's going for the Pacers, and I feel better about where Indiana is right now than where Atlanta was at that point, because at least they have a really good secondary all-star guy in Siakam, Miles Turner, Andrew Nembhard, Benedict Mathurin. I feel better about the young talent and the progression of those guys on this Pacers team than I did with that Hawks team. So I don't think it's an exact parallel situation, but it's somewhat similar, and the Pacers are clearly far from being a contender right now. How do you get to that point, especially if Haliburton doesn't elevate his game way beyond what we've seen already? But a lot of that is stuff you can worry about later. In the right now, the present day, you need Tyrese Haliburton to start looking like himself. If he's hurt, he needs to rest and just chill out, get 100%, because it's not helping the team right now trying to push through it. And to have the Pacers compete at the highest level, Haliburton has to be at his very, very best. He's nowhere near that right now. We'll have to wait and see what happens the rest of the year. Again, guys have started slow before and really figured it out. Like Julius Randle last season was one of the worst all-star caliber players to start a season ever. And ultimately, he ended up having a pretty good year before injury ultimately took away the second half of his season. Hopefully, we see something similar with Haliburton where he does have that big turnaround. I mean, he's got an NBA Cup game coming against the Bucks here pretty soon. I believe it's tomorrow as I'm uploading this video. So maybe that's the moment where he figures it out. He had a lot of good games against them last year in the Cup. maybe the turnaround is right around the corner. Maybe this Cone curse ends up fixing him. I don't know what it is, but I hope whatever is happening rectifies itself soon, because Haliburton is one of my favorite players to watch in the entire league when he's looking like himself. And so far, he's been anything but that. But yeah, those are my thoughts on Tyrese and the Pacers right now. Let me know what your thoughts are. What have been your takeaways with Hallie and Indiana so far this season? What would you do if you were their management? Leave a like, subscribe if you enjoy, hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos. And let me know what other teams, topics, players, narrative, storylines, whatever you want to see me make videos on as we go forward, because there's a lot of stuff that I want to cover. I'm just wondering what you guys want to see first before I just make any decision. So would love to hear your thoughts on that. But yeah, I appreciate you watching. I'll see y'all later. Real one, say back.